Flags matter. Symbols matter. And just like how our Canadian flag is a beacon of hope for so many people here at home and abroad, Madam Speaker, I was distraught as a person who has proudly worn our flag and the uniform of our country to see people wrap themselves in our flag, to use it as a shield for their behavior that sometimes was anything but honorable. And Madam Speaker, what I've commented upon thus far, beginning last evening and this morning, unfortunately describes in detail what I believe has lied at the heart of some of those who came to Ottawa. Because they didn't come here to register valid concerns. They certainly didn't need 3 weeks to pretend to try to do so. And the rhetoric that they spewed from their leaders didn't signal a desire for dialogue. No, Madam Speaker, they were trying to impose their views on the nation. They were fed up with mandates and vaccines and not being able to do whatever it is that they wanted. They wanted to dictate. Some even wanted to govern. Forget about the will of the people. It was a protester's own will that they wanted to impose. And that's not expressing freedom, Madam Speaker. It's also a grossly uneducated view of Canadian democracy, and it was an extremely poor attempt at fomenting a coup.
We know that the invocation of the Emergencies Act is not only unprecedented, but it is also extreme. And well, the Prime Minister has declared a public order emergency throughout Canada to justify this. There is no evidence that there is a public emergency to necessitate these broad sweeping powers. And I've listened closely to the comments from the Prime Minister and his government in this House and what they have told Canadians. And I have yet to hear really a legitimate justification for the implementation of this act. The reality, Madam Speaker, is that our country is hurting right now, and it is disheartening. The current state of affairs in this country is a direct consequence of the Prime Minister's failed leadership. At a time when we need leadership to bring Canadians together, the Prime Minister is acting like the Liberal Party leader and not the Prime Minister of Canada. Madam Speaker, at the very onset, before the Freedom Convoy even rolled into Ottawa, the Prime Minister publicly insulted Canadians and dismissed the genuine concerns being raised, doubling down on the division that his government's rhetoric and policies have sown into this country throughout the pandemic. Whether it be hubris or stubbornness, the Prime Minister has refused to make even the smallest of efforts to demonstrate to Canadians that he has listened, heard, and understood their concerns. And as we know, this past week, Conservatives presented the Liberal government with an extremely reasonable opportunity to do just that. This House, Madam Speaker, as you know, voted on a Conservative motion that would have compelled the government, compelled them to table in Parliament by the end of the month a plan, just a plan, to bring an end to the federal mandates and restrictions. This was a very reasonable motion and at the very least would have helped to bring some resolve to the growing frustrations. It would have also given all Canadians some clarity that, quite frankly, Madam Speaker, they are owed. And shamefully, we know that the Liberals rejected the motion. What has even been more troubling is that the Prime Minister, his Liberal government, refused to even tell Canadians what metrics are being used to justify the continued enforcement of federal mandates and restrictions. Madam Speaker, is it vaccination rates? Is it case counts? Is it hospital capacity? Or is it simply just Liberal ideology? Canadians don't know.
First off, I would like to thank my colleague for what she has said, and she has really touched me, and you'll see later on in my own speech. But my question is the following. Given that the Ambassador Bridge protest was taken down before this decree was in effect, what does she think happened in the parliamentary precinct where the authorities managed, with the rules in place, whether it's the criminal code or the highway code, Do you think the federal government are capitalizing on this situation, even if we haven't officially voted on this yet today?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. Again, this comes down to failed leadership. We know that law enforcement has the ability, and we've seen this, like I gave the examples, the Ambassador Bridge and also Coots. This comes down to the Prime Minister failing to acknowledge actual concerns that Canadians have and how it has affected their families and their livelihoods for the past 2 years. And the fact that the Liberal government, including the NDP, voted against the Conservative motion for the government to table a plan just shows the arrogance, and that the Prime Minister does not care about these concerns that these Canadians have.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada has become a very toxic petri dish of disinformation. We see online now this is somehow some kind of plot of the World Economic Forum. There's this crazy theory going around that the UN flew a secret plane into North Bay and they fired rubber bullets on people in Ottawa. We are hit and inundated with anti-vax disinformation, and it's also being perpetuated by Conservative MPs. In Washington, Congress is looking into whether Facebook was allowing bot accounts from foreign sources to push the convoy, particularly Russian disinformation. So my question is Parliament ready to step up and look at the disinformation campaign? If Congress is investigating what happened with the convoy, why is there not anything happening here in Parliament?
Now let me be clear. I will be voting against the use of the Emergencies Act. But my vote is far more than a simple nay. It is more than a monosyllabic answer, and it requires more than a 140-character tweet of an explanation. It is possible to add some gray to a black and white explanation. Madam Speaker, in Canada, it is possible to disagree with, to condemn, and to call for the removal of illegal blockades, while also suggesting that the government use measures short of the Emergencies Act to achieve that. As Canadians, we can call for and reinforce the need to be a country of law and order, while also arguing that the tools of the Emergencies Act are an overreach. We can and we must call out and condemn those who would use anti-democratic and nonsensical MOUs which call for the overthrow of a democratic government, while at the same time listening to the concerns of individual Canadians, business owners, truck drivers, and entrepreneurs who are concerned about how rules have impacted their businesses, their livelihoods, and their families. Madam Speaker, we can and we must call for the peaceful resolution of situations, while at the same time disagreeing with efforts to debank or freeze the assets of Canadian citizens. The question that confronts us today is whether this Act and the provisions included in the Order in Council are appropriate at this time and in these circumstances. On October 16th, 1970, the House of Commons convened to debate the declaration of the War Measures Act by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Of the speeches given that day, none was as clear as the clarion call of the gentleman from Prince Albert, the Right Honourable John Diefenbaker. In this House, at that time, he said, "Mr. Speaker, this is one of those occasions when Parliament has the opportunity of dealing with the question of freedom, which, above everything else, is the mandate of Parliament and the reason that Parliament exists." Today, 52 years later, Parliament is called upon once again to deal with this question of freedom. When the government places limits on the rights, freedoms, and privileges of Canadians, it is the government and the government alone that must justify it. It is the government that must show to Canadians that the limitations are reasonable. Indeed, the Emergencies Act itself requires it.